Hello Internet and welcome to Historical Headlines for the 23rd of January. The Dutch unionize. Spain violently disagrees. Not clickbait. And we are in the Dutch city of Utrecht in 1579, where the Treaty of Utrecht, which makes sense in many ways, was first signed on this day in history. So, what was the Treaty of Utrecht? Well, it was a union of the northern provinces of the Spanish Netherlands. Now, this might not mean that much to most of you, but just be aware that what is today Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg had been under Spanish rule for some time at this particular time period. We don't need to go into why they were under Spanish rule, but it had to do with inheritance stretching all the way back to the early days of the Carolingian Empire. Nonetheless, the Spains had never really treated the Spanish Netherlands all that well, seeing it mostly as a personal dominion of the king that ensured him revenue without actually having to care very much about the people living up there. This, of course, was not super popular with the burgeoning merchant class of especially northern Spanish Netherlands, what is today the Netherlands, and it became especially worse after the Reformation, where most of the north became Protestant while most of the south, that is Belgium and Luxembourg, remained Catholic, and especially as more and more Protestants started finding refuge in the northern Dutch provinces because Spanish rule was perhaps a little bit less overbearing there than it was so many other places. However, eventually the Spanish rule did become overbearing, and in 1568 there broke out one of the longest running military confrontations in European history, the 80 Years' War. William the Silent of the House of Orange led numerous northern noblemen and magnates in a revolt and rebellion against the Spanish King Philip II. In many ways, it was a precursor to the American Revolution a couple of centuries later, inasmuch as they wanted representation, they wanted less taxes, they wanted religious freedom, etc., 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 and the home government was a tiny bit unwilling to listen to them for various reasons, mainly because they wanted the money and because they were convinced Catholics. Now, this is not the first time rebellion had broken out against the Spanish in their far-flung territories. It would not be the last either. But at this time, mostly everyone expected it to be crushed fairly quickly, or people coming to some kind of resolution anyway. Except, of course, as I mentioned, there is a reason it's called the 80 Years' War. But we will get back to that. However, to talk you through the immediate effects of the Treaty of Utrecht, here is our time-traveling naked man, Tim Sateson.
Thank you, studio. We are standing here in the city of Utrecht, where the Dutch rebellion have now moved into a new phase. Up until this time, there is absolutely no doubt that it was just a collection of singular noblemen and merchants trying to resist the power of the Spanish throne. Now, though, almost 7 of the northern provinces have united in a union to resist the power of Philip II and become an independent country under their own laws. They have issued a religious freedom edict, the first one of its time. There is no religious compulsion within what will eventually, if they have their will, become the United Provinces. This must be seen as a dreadful blow towards Spain. While the southern provinces have entered their own union in support of the Spanish rule and the Spanish throne, the north holds much of the money, which means the Spanish hold on what they already have will in fact be a drain on the royal treasury rather than a net gain for it. And with the amount of money in the north, they will be able to hire strong mercenary armies, which means that the Spanish will need to spend ever greater amounts of money in order to regain control of the rebellious noblemen and provinces. And if they fail, it would become a terrifying blow towards Spanish pretensions to still be the world-dominating power that they were just 40 years ago under Charles V. However, of course, things are not exactly looking bleak for the Spanish Empire. They are still the most powerful colonial ruler in the world. Their armies are supreme. They have enormous amounts of land area area from which to draw money and manpower, and they hold still their alliance with their familiar cousins in the Holy Roman Empire, as the Habsburg family, as you know, rule both of these great realms. Nonetheless, with the founding of this treaty, what had become a manageable revolt has suddenly become an actual war, and with Philip already involved in his feudal struggles with France and England, there might also be natural allies to the Dutch rebels. But it's time, I think, to talk to the instigator of this rebellion, the leader of the Dutch revolt, and the person most responsible for the founding of this Union of Utrecht, William the Silent of Orange. Mr. the Silent, please talk us through the intricate maneuvers that lies behind this new union and how you managed to convince your more wavering compatriots that such a step was to be proven necessary. Lord William, I see that this union does not in fact remove the King of Spain as ruler of you. You are still supposed to be loyal to him, only demanding certain concessions from the throne of Spain, which seems somewhat at odds with what the union otherwise appears to be wishing to do. Would this be seen as a sign of weakness within your new union because you had to placate the waverers somehow before it went too far in their eyes?
No, but thank you for letting me explain the situation to your listeners. Have a nice day.
Well, I don't know what I was expecting, to be honest, from a man nicknamed the Silent, but still a momentous day in history, and one can only hope that this will lead the Spanish to come to a settled negotiation with the northern rebels so we don't have to enter another era of massive bloodshed. Back to the studio.
Thank you, Mr. Sateson, although I am a bit surprised that you, as a time-traveling reporter, keeps making the mistake of assuming that everything will turn out for the best when you know full well that it absolutely won't. In fact, the Treaty of Utrecht galvanized the Northern Dutch Rebellion's cause and led to, as I said, the 80 Years' War. It eventually lasted so long that it became embroiled in the 30 Years' War of the early 17th century, and in fact wasn't settled until the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, at which point it was actually William the Silent's, I think, great-grandson who was the leader of the rebellion, and of course Philip's descendant as well. What is interesting, however, is what this gave rise to, because in the end, after a truce in 1609, where the Spanish basically had to admit that yes, this was probably almost an independent country at this time, the 7 northern provinces formed what would become the United Provinces, which would eventually become the modern-day nation of Holland, or the Netherlands, whatever you choose to call it these days. Now, the United Provinces are interesting because it was the first sort of real, shall we say, republic since the days of Greece and Rome. While there were inherited noblemen, like for instance the House of Orange, who eventually became kings of England, by the way, the United Provinces was ruled far more by a council of elders and elected officials, and with that came a natural focus on trade and general economic prosperity that allowed it to become a very important member of the European family of nations up until a decline somewhere in the 18th century. On the other hand, this also signaled the decline of the Spanish Empire. The Spanish have been the most powerful country in, well, probably the world at the time, as China went through some issues around this particular time period, and had been, in fact, almost untouchable in Europe for about 80 or so years. But with the embroilment of war against both England and France and the United Province rebellion, and against Italian nationalists, and the just general conservatism of Spanish society beginning to rear its ugly head to a degree that Spain simply forgot to, well, let's be fair and honest, evolve militarily and societally over the next 300 years, it helped move Spain from being supreme in Europe to being a, well, lesser power only about a century later. Anyway, today's historical headline: the Dutch unionize. Spain reacts violently to it. The Treaty of Utrecht that signaled the founding of the United Provinces and the beginning of the very, very long Dutch rebellion against Catholic Habsburg Spain. I hope this has been at least of some interest to you. I shall be back tomorrow with another historical headline. Until then, I have been the Sage, and I wish you all a very happy day.